In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at assignment 4.3 in WAMAP. When you do WAMAP assignments like this, you'll find that the problems often don't look the same as yours. That's because WAMAP actually randomizes lots of things on the backside. And in this case, it's randomizing numbers and variable names. So like mine is Z's for my variables. The one that you have might well be X's or Y's or something else. That's okay. Our basic process is still going to be the same for this. The other thing to note is that sometimes you'll see the questions come at you in a different order than what I see them in. That is also part of the randomization that I often will build into WAMAP here. All right, so in order to simplify this particular expression, the very first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of the parentheses. So that requires us to distribute. So I'm going to distribute the 5 first into that set of parentheses. And when I do that, that's going to give me 5z plus 50. Now notice I'm writing it down that way. I actually expect you to be writing stuff down too. I know you're doing math on the computer, but that doesn't change the fact that you still should be writing it down. There's a reason why math teachers go on and on about showing your work. I'm not quite as picky about how you show your work, but I do want you writing enough down so that you don't lose track of things halfway through the problem. And on something like this, we really do need to keep track of it. All right, so I distributed the 5 in. Then this plus is going to carry over, so I go ahead and just write that plus here. And then I'm going to distribute the 8 into the other set of parentheses. And so then that will give me 32z minus 16. So that's the first thing we do, is get rid of any parentheses that are in the problem. That's the first step of simplification. The next step, since we've gotten rid of all the parentheses, we now can go and look to combine like terms. Now remember, like terms are ones that have the same variables to the same powers. And of course, terms are also separated by addition and subtraction. So there's a grand total of 4 terms in my new expression over here. And I'm going to just start with the first one here, which is 5z. So I'm going to put a box around anything that I can combine with that. Now that one's got a z in it, and so does this. Yes, I include the plus that's in front of it because it helps me to know that it's a positive 32z. So those two are going to get combined. So 5 plus 32 is 37. So that becomes a 37z. Notice it's just a z. It's not a z squared or anything like that, because in order to combine like terms, they have to be the same letter with the same power, right? Anytime two things have to be the same in math, it's because they're going to stay the same. And so it's got to be 37 z's. In other words, we had 5 z's, we added 32 more z's, which gives us a grand total of 37 z's. All right. All right, then I have a 50 here. It has no variable in it. So I'm putting a circle around that. I'm going to put a circle around anything else that has no variable in it. And yes, that is the 16 here. So I'm going to do 50 minus 16, which is 36. A positive 36, so I write it as plus 36. From here, there's no other simplification I can do, because we only have 2 terms and they are not like terms, therefore they cannot be combined. And so then this would be my final answer. So I would just type that into the box right here and then click the submit question button. And you should be told then that you got 1 out of 1 on that first problem. Now, if you don't get 1 out of 1 on the first one or any others, go back, redo it, and keep working on it until you do get 100% on the problem. That's the whole goal of WAMAP, is that you're going to be able to go through this and be able to do every single problem. And if there's one that's giving you trouble, make sure to let me know so I can help you out with it. On to the next problem now. This one is asking us to factor the expression. Now, factoring is basically what we just did on the last problem with distributing, except backwards. Factoring means to rewrite it with a set of parentheses in there. So we know we're going to end up with something outside of a set of parentheses. And that's what our answer is going to look like, because we are factoring. Now, the tricky part is that we always want to factor it completely. And completely means by figuring out what is the biggest thing that we can pull outside of those parentheses. So in this one, I have 49z to the ninth, and I have 35z to the seventh. I'm going to start by just looking at the two numbers that are out front. That is the coefficients. And so 49 and 35. What multiplies into both 49 and 35? You hopefully are coming up with 7, because I can divide both 49 and 35 by 7. All right, and so what that means then is that I'm going to have a 7 out front of my parentheses, and on the inside, well, if I do the 49 divided by 7, that gives me 7, so I know there's going to be a 7 on the inside. And if I do the 35 divided by 7, that gives me 5, so I know there's also going to be a 5 on the inside. And that minus right here, that is still just going to be hanging out there inside our parentheses as well. So we got our minus there. All right, now this is just work so far. We're nowhere near done. It's looking kind of funky right now because we also have to account for the z's. I have z to the ninth and I have z to the seventh. Again, I'm figuring out what can I divide out of both of those terms. And if I'm trying to figure out what divides out of both of those, it's always going to be whatever variable has the lowest exponent. Because I can pull the 7 z's that I have here out of these 9, but I cannot pull 9 out of 7. And so we are going to end up with 7z to the 7th outside of our parentheses. Now, if I do z to the 9th and I take out z to the 7th, I am left with 2 z's. And so I'm going to be left with z squared there. And then it's minus 5. And then remember that I took out 7 z's. That means I've taken out all 7 of those. So there's no z left in that last term inside the parentheses, which means then that this is my final answer. And so I'm going to type that into the box right there exactly as I see it. And then I'm going to click the Submit Question button. Now, if you aren't sure how to type something in, you can always use the MathQuill equation enter. Or I'll also show you really quick here. If I'm typing that in, I would type in 7z to the power of 7 like that. And then I'll just type the parentheses after that. That little caret key, which is Shift 6, that means to the power of. And so that would get you there. All right, one last thing I want to show you. This problem is now done. The rest of what I'm talking about with this particular problem is only just a little bit more depth on why it worked the way it did. So I'm now going to go backwards on this, and I'm going to multiply this 7z to the 7th back into the parentheses, just so I can show you why it works and a way that you can check your work if you want to. This does not affect our final answer in any way, though, and nor is it required that you would have to do this every time. All right, so if I multiply the 7 by the 7, then I get 49. And then if I do z to the 7th times z squared, when you do z to the 7th times z squared, you have to add their exponents. Because basically you have 7 z's all multiplied out together in the first part. And then we're going to be multiplying that by 2 more z's. So notice that's a grand total of 9 z's. We just add the 7 and the 2 in order to be able to get there. So it's 49 z to the 9th. Then I'm going to go ahead and multiply the 7z to the 7th out front of the parentheses by the 5. The minus that's in front of the 5 just stays there. 5 times 7 is 35. And z to the 7th, there's no z here in order to be affecting anything, so it just stays 35z to the 7th. Notice this is indeed what we started with over here, which means that yes, we did it correctly. And it also shows by going back the other direction, maybe why I was able to pull out some of the things the way I did. and help you to kind of see your way through some of that. This next problem, we're doing more factoring. These should now go a bit faster because I've basically laid all the foundations for all the rest of it. So factoring it again means that we're going to end up including parentheses where there weren't parentheses before. That means looking at everything I'm starting with and saying what can I divide all of the terms by. In this case, there's 3 terms, so I'm saying what can I divide all 3 of them by? And you notice that they're all divisible by 4. I cannot pull out x's out of any of them because you'll notice that there is no x in this last term. And so only 4 comes out of it, not a 4x or anything like that. So since I can pull out a 4, I'm going to start by writing a 4, and then I start my parentheses. Everything inside the parentheses is exactly what I had in the original problem, except divided by 4. So I'm going to get 11x to the 11th plus, well, 4x divided by 4 would be 1x, but I don't really need to write 1x. I can just write that as x. And then minus 40 divided by 4 is 10. And so that is now factored. That would be your final answer that you'd put in and submit. Our next problem says to expand. That is, use the distributive property here. So you're just going to be multiplying the 4 into the parentheses. In this case, you will have to multiply it by 4 different terms on the inside. And so we just need to make sure we hit all of them. So 4 times 2 is going to give me 8. The x to the 9th does not change because there's no x on the outside that's being multiplied in. Then minus 4 times 10 is 40. And again, the x to the 7th stays the same. Then 4 times 5x, that's going to give me 20x. Again, the x stays the same. And then 4 times 8 is going to be 32. I've now multiplied the 4 in. That is now considered to be expanded, and that is then done. On our next one, it looks like we're back to factoring. We're going to factor this expression. Again, factor means insert parentheses where there weren't any before. And we're going to do that by looking to see what can I divide out of every single term. In this case, it looks like we can divide all 3 of them by 4. Now, a little side note, if you were thinking, well, they're all divisible by 2, that's true, but there's a bigger one, so we have to go with the bigger one. So I'm going to divide everything through by 4. I wonder what the affinity for this particular assignment is with 4s. Sometimes it just works out that way. So I have 4 times what? Well, I now am going to divide all 3 terms by 4. So 44x to the 4th. Well, 44 divided by 4 is 11. And the x to the 4th divided by 4, well, I already did the dividing by 4 part because I divided 44. I'm not dividing by any x's. And so the x part stays exactly the same because there's no x on the outside of the parentheses. All right, then the minus stays a minus. 40x divided by 4 is 10x. Minus stays a minus. 8 divided by 4 is just 2. That then is your final answer for this one. My next problem is more factoring. And so again, I want to look at my original expression here and figure out what can I divide out of all 3 of those terms. And there's actually quite a few different numbers that you could divide out of all of them, but we need to find the biggest one. And the biggest one happens to be 12. So we are going to factor a 12 out of every single term. So we start by doing 108 divided by 12, which is 9. And so that's going to be 9x to the 6th. Because there's no x on the outside that we're pulling out, so all of the x's stay exactly as they were. Then the minus stays a minus here, so then 24x divided by 12 is going to be 2x. Then the minus stays a minus, and 12 divided by 12. 12 divided by 12 is 1. And then you end your parentheses. That 1 has to be there. A very common error that I will see people make is they will think that it all ends after the 2x. Because, well, we divided out the 12. I took out the 12, right? Isn't it gone? No, it's not gone because I still have to do the 12 divided by 12. And 12 divided by 12 is 1, not 0. All right, now on to the last problem on my particular assignment. This one also happens to be one that a lot of people will get tripped up by if you're not being really careful. So we're simplifying it. Okay, as we saw earlier, that just means we got to start by getting rid of the parentheses. So I'm going to distribute into the parentheses. The big, most important question here, though, is what are you distributing into the parentheses? If you distribute in 5, you'll probably come up with this as your first step, but it's not right. What you actually want to distribute into the parentheses is actually -5, because whatever that sign is in front of the 5, we want to carry it through. And so actually multiply into the parentheses a -5. So if we do that, then my 8 out front is still just an 8, and then it'll be minus 5w. And then the critical piece here, we're doing -5 times 7, which is actually a -35. This would now be the correct distribution. That's the hardest part, and that's where most people end up getting tripped up on this. From here, it's just a matter of combining the like terms. And for combining the like terms, I have an 8 and I have a -35 that I'm going to go ahead and combine there. So 8 minus 35 is -27. And then there's nothing to go with this minus 5w, so it's going to stay a minus 5w. This cannot be simplified any further, and therefore, that is your final answer that you will submit.